This is the Truth Be Told podcast, where we unlock the secrets of strategic communication. Welcome to this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast. My guest today is coming to us from several time zones away in the Netherlands, An Gaiser, who's going to provide a much more accurate pronunciation of her name here in a few minutes. Anne has a background in social work and began her career as a probation officer. Anne continued her career joining the General Intelligence and Security Service, which is the intelligence and security agency in the Netherlands tasked with domestic, foreign, and signals intelligence and protecting national security. In this capacity, Anne's going to share how she learned from researchers, practical experience, and trained operators throughout the agency. Anne pursued her passion for training and education, becoming a managing partner of the Institute for Nonverbal Strategy Analysis, and now runs her own consulting firm. In her extensive experience, Anne's going to share with us her insight on nonverbal assessments, security clearance screening, the importance of empathy, and how our own behavior impacts conversation. Make sure to stay tuned for the full episode and learn how recording yourself can make you a better communicator. Welcome to this Truth Be Told podcast. I'm your host, Dave Thompson, and I am here with, I'm going to pronounce it in a dumb English accent, An Gaiser, but maybe you can, before we get anything, what is the correct pronunciation of your name?
It's Gaiser with the Dutch.
I tried. I was spitting all over my desk when I tried to say it.
Yeah, maybe you should try Scheveningen.
Yeah.
And then you have it.
Yeah, it's great. Well, thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to talk. You've got a wealth of experience, but before we get into all of that, where are you dialing in from in the world so people can kind of look at where you're at on the globe?
Yes. Well, right now, actually, I'm working and living in The Hague, in the city center. So it might be that you are actually hearing the city tram coming by, but hopefully it's not too irritating or whatever. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you. I know our time zones are a little off, but what's kind of neat, what I look forward to in our conversation is how much you have done in the world of kind of understanding nonverbal assessments, understanding intelligence and security screenings, but how really, regardless of culture, we're still looking at a lot of the same information about how do we talk to people to get more information, how do we protect our communities. So I'm excited to learn about that from you, but maybe you can give us a little bit about kind of your background and how you got into this world in the first place. Oh, that's there can be a very broad answer. How long do you want it?
We'll start from the top.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe from the beginning, I got fascinated by behavior because I have a background with people of parents who have psychiatric problems, actually. So I had to observe and to learn to use my senses in a way. To observe behavior, to keep myself safe. And that's why I also got fascinated in behaviors and psychiatry, psychopathology as well, because I also wanted to understand myself, right? So am I in any danger or risk to have problems myself or to get any issues? And that actually got me fascinated in behaviors of others as well. So because I come from a lower status background and community, I had to start from the beginning. So first college, associate's degree, bachelor degree, and then I studied nonverbal strategy analysis. And of course I am mentored by Joe Navarro, ex-FBI agent as well. So after my bachelor degree social work, I started at the parole or probation office, because in the Netherlands you do all in one organization. So this is what got me started in work, actually.
So talk about that a little bit. When you're doing kind of the parole probation work, what did that look like for you? Like what's a typical week, and what kind of things did you encounter in that space?
It depends, because like said, we deal with probation and parole cases all combined. And we had this strategy of first reporting to court. So if someone is still a suspect, I had to talk with a suspect to see what got him into problems. Not so much is he guilty, yes or no, but what got him into contact with the police, with court, etc. And report about the possible chance of recidivism. So we had to assess and make a plan about if he is guilty, what should we do, how should we, after incarceration or sentence, what should we do? Should he get therapy, yes or no? And after all that, when he's free again, he got parole as well. So I had to guide him to go into therapy, to have weekly conversations with someone. So it's very broad, actually, in the Netherlands.
In that space, you're probably obviously you're dealing with people who've made some poor decisions in their life, and I've heard you do some talks and discussions on really the importance of empathy and understanding maybe that even good people sometimes make bad decisions, but you're also probably dealing with people that have made a lot of bad decisions. And so what was that like? How difficult is it to work that close with somebody and help them reintegrate into society, but you also know they've done some things that are not good for the community?
Yeah, good question. I think it all starts with, is someone really aware that they are making bad decisions, or is it unconsciously that they have the feeling that they got into circumstances that they feel they do not have influence on? And especially with people who have, for instance, psychiatric problems, psychosis, and within the psychosis someone starts to assault someone or maybe even kill someone. On the other hand, I also had to deal with very nasty sexual abuses as well, trying to understand the difference between a pedophile and a pedosexual, for instance, because there are a lot of misunderstanding about that difference. But when it comes to a pedosexual, for instance, I got the most horrifying stories. And it took me 10 years or so to understand if I really wanted to dive into that more or just quit and find something else, because emotionally it can be very tough.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then I know we're going to get into a little bit about this, trying to figure out if people are being truthful with you or not. But in that world, right, you're surrounded by people who have a lot to lose if they do something wrong again. They have a lot to lose potentially if they lie to you. So they're really high stakes conversations. And I'm assuming your role is to make sure that they're looking for an employment, they're being a good upstanding citizen, but they also have an incentive to probably keep information from you. So what was that experience like? Did it, I guess, roll into your personal life where now you're very paranoid about everybody, and are they telling you the truth? Are they being skeptical? How does that work?
Well, I think maybe because of my background, I was paranoid a little bit already, and actually it got me thinking into a less judgmental way about what drives people actually. And that's why I always say I'm not a nonverbal expert, I'm not a body language expert, I'm not a communication expert in that way, but what I am an expert in is finding people's drivers and motives and interests. And that is also about nonverbal behavior, about linguistics, about how you tend to speak with someone, how important is empathy by itself as well. And it really got me to understand, by letting everything go about, is someone telling the truth, yes or no? That I found that spot in how to overcome resistance as well. For instance, when I was 23, I was already working at the office there. And I had this person who was actually convicted of committed a rape and more, actually, younger girls. But he was also a politician. So the way he came in was very, a lot of authority, very intimidating. Me as a young girl, I was actually a possible victim as well. So I felt very intimidated by how he treated me. So first, when I started, I was like, oh, I should really get this bastard, and I should really tell him what not to do. You should not do that anymore, sir. So this was my approach in the beginning, which did not work, of course. And he was constantly like, you should go back to school, you understand nothing. And this really got me to understand, oh wow, this is my personal impact. So I started not to so much reflect upon him, but more reflecting on what are my judgments doing in the conversation? What am I doing in the conversation? What is my impact? So I started to learn by inventing the wheel again, I guess, because I did not have a lot of scientific knowledge back then, just to see and to experiment what would happen if I lowered myself a little bit. Not trying to be the probation officer authority, but more so, you are absolutely right, sir. I don't know anything about your situation. Just please tell me so that I can understand you. And this really helped me to elicit more information and also to overcome such resistances. Now, actually, I was a bit exhausted after that because of all those cases I had to deal with, but also by teaching other people. I love teaching other people, I still do. But I really started to understand, okay, I need to learn myself as well. Looking for my own personal development as well. And I wanted a little bit of quiet life after the probation officer, and my then husband said, okay, if you want a quiet life, why not start the Secret Service? And I'm like, what? How is that? Secret sounds quiet. That was actually his joke. He is in cybersecurity and also worked at the AVD as well. So that was his way of joking about Secret Service. So I really thought, oh, maybe why not? And at that time, there was a possibility for me to become a security clearance officer. So doing the vettings and the screenings, not only from the AVD personnel, but also from high stakes situations. So director generals of other services, from ministries, etc. So I started to screen those people, and at that time I really got interested in nonverbals and linguistics as well. And it had a specific reason, because it turned everything upside down. As a probation officer, I had to deal with people constantly who committed a crime or were a suspect. So they had everything wrong in their life, and you had to find this certain hook where someone felt comfortable or was going well in their life, so you could use that to help them to reintegrate. And with the AVD it was the other way around. So everything was going well in their lives, and you had to find that certain vulnerability. So you had to find a hook in the way they talked, in the way they present themselves, to see if there's information to elicit there. But in both cases I really knew or felt that people were lying to me. So this got me into the interest of how can I argument better, how can I teach myself, how can I train myself to understand why these two situations, completely different, are actually still the same. So this got me very interested at the AVD. So they decided for me that I should run a business case and see what is out there. How can I help the AVD to understand those kinds of behaviors a bit better?
So when you're tasked with these security clearance conversations or interviews or the process, what type of training, before you went out and made your business case that you needed more knowledge, what kind of training did you get at that time?
Well, before I started at the AVD, I graduated for a bachelor's degree in social work. So this is what you actually need when you want to become a probation officer or criminology or psychology, etc. And my specialism was also what we call in the Netherlands TBS or youth TBS, which is all about people who committed a crime because of psychopathology issues or psychiatry issues. I had a lot of training in that, so to be able to understand, is this behavior coming from what we could perceive as a healthy person, or is there maybe more? So when I became a security clearance officer, then you go into a 6-week training to understand the Secret Service, their intelligent work, how to be able to get your sources, to get your information. Also, because I was on the road as a Secret Service employee, I was on the road going to people's houses to have their conversations. So I also had to learn about how to do contra observations, for instance, to be able to keep myself safe as well. So this is actually a 6-week training where you get it all, and if you are not yet able to have the difficult conversations, you also are able to get those trainings in as well.
So I'm curious because I know a lot of our listeners are either in law enforcement or maybe wanted to be in law enforcement or retired from that space, and so they've gone through a background check process and maybe a polygraph and a background investigation. And I got, a lot of colleagues have done that. I went through that process myself, and it can be pretty intimidating as an applicant. And so I'm wondering, from your role, especially in the high stakes conversations you're having, what kind of pressure is there on you? Because if you allow somebody or give the approval that this person should be given clearance, and you find out that there was a problem, that's a risk. So do you feel like you almost have a need to find an issue sometimes, even if there isn't one that exists?
Wow, that's a good reflection, actually. um, there is a lot of miscommunication about what security clearances actually are. In the Netherlands, you have certain levels, right? So if you are an AVD employee, you get the highest level, A+. The same with the Director General or people in high stake communities. But you also can have just a form you have to fill in, and then they check in your background, they check in if you have ever been in contact with the police or the justice system, and that's it. So if I had to do those kinds of screenings, that's not so much to deal with. But for me, the most difficult thing was, and feeling the pressure, because that is what you asked actually, I feel the most pressure when I feel that there is something off, but you cannot put the finger on it. And you do not have enough, based on your intuition, to say, we should not do this. And then a lot of the time, not a lot of the time, a few cases where I really felt the pressure, okay, we have to let him go. We have to let him go through the process, because he's going to have this job, because we don't have enough to say, sorry guy, you're too vulnerable or whatever. So that is where the situation where I felt the most of the pressure, actually.
I'm sure. And then, I feel like in that process, whether it's for security clearance or just obtaining a position, there's a lot of anxiety on the applicant side, even if they've got nothing wrong, right? Where you're concerned of, what if it looks like I'm being deceptive, or what if I'm nervous about something in my past, but it's not criminal of nature, it's just, I don't know who you're going to talk to in your background. Do you feel like you had a lot of false flags where something looked like it was suspicious, but found out there's a different reason for that concern?
Yeah, often. And I think that is almost the same discussion as when people have to undergo through a polygraph, right? So why is the stress actually there? For instance, what I always say, if I ask you, did you have other relations other than your partner? Because there can be blackmail issues in the future, right? And then the thought alone that you have other relations with someone else can make your heart rate go up, can make you feel stressed. You can look away in a certain direction, let's talk about myths later. But all those signals you can see based on, oh wow, if that would happen, that would really ruin my life. So that alone can give you enough stress. So I really had to check with my conversational skills, with my interview techniques actually, okay, what is happening right now? How are you feeling when I asked that question? How is it for you, for me to be able to ask that question? So this is how I constantly checked if there were any false positives or negatives or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good takeaway, and I think the same will apply to victim interviews and witness interviews and investigations, because a lot of times investigators or even jurors or lay people that are observing an interview are expecting a witness or a victim to act in a certain way, and their behavior should show a certain thing, but it may be opposite of what we assume. And that's kind of what you're describing there.
Yeah, I actually had a very good conversation with the just retired Secret Service agent polygrapher as well. And because he knew Joe Navarro, which we are both mentored by in the past, he was like, okay, maybe you should give me some feedback on my interviewing experience or skills. Because my colleagues are also very nice all the time. They don't give me the harsh feedback all the time. So I really wanted to know from this blonde Dutch woman, investigative interviewer, how you actually perceive this interview. And what you actually see, and he was very, very vulnerable, which I always think if you can be vulnerable as an interviewer, then you are a good interviewer. So I actually talked with him about the suggestive questions he actually asked, and that I could see it in how he reported about those questions. And I really gave him feedback about it's quite logical that he shows stress because it's a suggestive question. And he was very open about it. So we should always understand that our own impact can also create stress on our suspects or our victims or whatever. People are always interested in the quick fixes, right? So they were very interested in how can micro expressions or the idea of people showing emotions on their face, how could that help us? Is that something we can use because it might be about lie detection? What can we use about linguistics? What can we use about the theory that your fight, flight, freeze system or stress system is actually also influencing the situation in an interview? So this actually got me into a lot of research, and I came about in a conversation with Herman Ilge, who is from the Institute of Nonverbal Strategy Analysis. And he was actually quite critical about the emotion theory or the micro-expression theory, because he already has seen as a negotiator, as a conflict negotiator, that people show behaviors constantly and not only in certain circumstances, or like how we used to call them incidental movements based on what people say in a certain situation. But we do things constantly, like I don't know how many times you counted me raising my eyebrows, but it is a lot. So that would mean that I'm always surprised. Yeah, so that was my understanding already. Okay, there is much more to research and to understand. So he was doing his scientific research, which was actually published, peer-reviewed in 2021. And I was one of the first people who actually was educated based on that research, which took me a year to understand, to make assessments of people with the INSA method, which we like to call it. And then I started to be interested in the other side of the story as well. Okay, the INSA method is not the only way how you can assess people. There are linguistics, there are other nonverbal cues like the Codex of Joe Navarro, for instance. How well argumented is it scientifically, and what can I use? So this started really researching my own methodology as well. So why not base my assessment on certain methods, but more so base my scenarios on what I know about nonverbal assessment. So if I see something in an interview happening, it might mean that I'm looking at a certain behavior which the INSA method explains as, oh, he's very analytical, he's trying to get a grip on the situation, he might be having control issues, or is he angry? So this helped me actually in the conversations as well. So the research was also about practicing with all those methods within my research to see what is really helping me in any investigative interview.
So if we explore that a little bit more with the nonverbal assessment, I know we've talked at length about this, is there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of research, and then there's also a lot of people just trying to sell. I can tell if somebody's lying because if they scratch their face 3 times or raise their eyebrows, they must be surprised. So how should an investigator or an interviewer absorb all this research? I mean, is there anything that exists that we can identify if somebody's lying based on their physical behavior?
Well, I think there has been a lot of research about that already, and we constantly say, no, there is not. There is no Pinocchio effect. There is no certain behavior indicative of deception. And also a lot of research that, for instance, Vincent Deneau does, which I know you know him. Some of his research, I'm very happy with it because it gives me another way of interpreting behavior of others. So no, there is no single behavior. I don't believe in that. But my method is really about getting as much information, scientific knowledge, actually fill your tool set to be able to understand when something is happening, and just park your judgment on your one shoulder, and on the other shoulder there is your testing gear, if you will. So research says this about this movement, so I should ask this question to see if my scenario or my judgment is actually the case in this conversation. So what I actually do is scenario building. It can be this, for instance, drawing in the lips. Someone can be ashamed, someone can be hiding someone can also be a little bit shy, for instance, or be polite because the other person is still talking. So I work out all those scenarios in the conversation, and then I can deduct what is actually left, and then I can build the information elicitation system, if you would like.
Yeah, and that part's really important because it's easy to either teach or sell, or people just assume that, okay, every time somebody does this, it equals that. Every time somebody avoids eye contact, it means that they're lying to me, or it means that they're ashamed. And that mental process you just went through is really what investigators should be doing. And not even investigators, just everybody, right? You could be talking to your significant other and you think they're lying, but it's because they had a bad day at work.
Exactly.
Or, right? They're mad at you for something else. So I think that's really important, is to have some more context to what we're looking at, observing, and also how we as the interviewer are impacting that person's behavior.
Yeah, for sure. And I always say half of the information that you observe is actually about you. So that's something I train people in as well, to really understand that. If I start to frown, for instance, and squint because I'm really trying to understand what someone else is saying to me, he might find me very critical. So what might happen because of that? He shuts down because she's critical, she's highly alert, I should not say anything else. So once you understand that that is going on, also, if you see someone acting based on your nonverbal impact, you can understand also what you can do to get rid of those kinds of noises. For instance, how is it for you? Like I said before, that I ask those questions. Or maybe you can see me frown right now, but it is because I really want to understand you on the relationship level or on the content. And if someone tends to relax, then you know it was about your nonverbal impact and not about what someone else is thinking internally.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Our organization has advocated for the recording of interviews and interrogations for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
I think one of the real big benefits of recording is you can watch yourself and you can listen to yourself. So I know for me, during interviews I've done, if I am talking to somebody who's not being truthful, or I feel like they're not being truthful, my tone gets sharper, my questions get more pointed, and I become more exaggerated in my hand movements. I'm talking like a crazy person. None of that is good. And going back and watching, now I can identify that when I got into that type of behavior, it actually impacted the way that the interviewee responded to me. So it was a result of my behavior, not necessarily theirs.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I always say that what I often see is that body language experts tend to analyze people, familiar people on TV, on the interviewing. I wrote a blog about the Dutch prince, or the English, the Britain prince, Harry and Meghan, for instance.
Yeah.
And they were so fascinated about when he does this, that might be meaning that he is lying, etc. And I'm like, why? I am more interested in your behavior, why you want to know, because your drivers and your motives of wanting to know is actually about how your own brain works. You are not understanding their behavior, so you are trying to place a label on those people. So all those body language experts you see, I think, are more about helping other people giving their brains some rest by labeling certain behaviors. But the question is that behavior actually there with the other person you are observing? You don't know.
Yeah, you know what? It's very timely because in the States we are, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, in an election year, and so we've got obviously presidential candidates now going back and forth, and debates are happening, and this is the time where you get all these body language experts, and in quotes, that are going to make an analysis after a debate, and they're going to claim that, you know, Trump said this, but he actually felt this way, or Biden said this, but look at his shoulder when he said that. And what's your opinion on that, on the people that are trying to analyze these out of context, like debate type conversations?
Yeah, I do have an opinion on that, but I also learned to be less critical about it because they might be right in certain circumstances. So what I always say, go let yourself be taught by those people because it fills your toolkit of possible scenarios. So in that way, I think it's still good. On the other hand, I think it's very dangerous because they just help you also play judgments without having the contextual information as well. You can actually influence your the way you are going to vote based on what other people say. And I think as an expert you should be neutral in a sense. And also I'm also very concerned about if I analyze people like that, I would rather be in the situation that I can help them, to be a consultant, to be a coach, to be their trainer. And if I start to analyze those people in that way, very openly, publicly, they won't trust me anymore. And that's what we all are about, right? Building trust with people and also being very integer about it. So if I would start to analyze those kinds of people, I would never be able to help them or to coach them. So this is why I'm careful myself.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there that I really like. The first part is we have no idea on the context, right? And you mentioned this before. I have seen the same exact behaviors shown by a political candidate that in one news station are covered in a way that makes it seem like that person was being arrogant or whatever it might be. And in a different station with a different bias, they have a whole different analysis of that same exact behavior. So you can tell the expert's not neutral, right? They're gearing their opinion based on their own judgment or their audience judgment. But the second piece you said is our goal is trust. And I like that if you apply that to just a regular like investigative interview, if an interviewer finds or feels like somebody's being deceptive, and I always thought this was kind of funny. I mean, people get taught, well, if somebody does this behavior, they scratch their face, they look away, they're a liar. But then what are you going to do with that information, right? You're not just going to say, hey, Ann, you're lying, or let me write my report, Ann lied at the 30-minute mark. Instead, it's how do you use that maybe discomfort in the conversation to understand that they need more empathy to discuss something. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and it also, when you say this, it helps me reflect also on when you are in investigative interviewing, it should be a collaboration, especially in security clearances, right? So not everyone is very reflective in a way, but are still able to do a great job, but do not understand what kind of pluses of behaviors actually can help them to be more vulnerable. So if they start to lie, or I think maybe someone is lying, it might also be that they are still lying to themselves. So who is lying actually? I should find out. And by being able to say, hey, what is going on with you right now? Shall we reflect upon it? Or shall we put the elephant on the table? Because this is what I see. And if I would reflect on the risks or dangers of that kind of behavior, I would come up with a few conclusions. For instance, how do you feel about that? So you really help someone to be reflective, and that can also give you a lot of information about if he or she is able to deal with those vulnerabilities before they get their clearances. Because you should always check if someone would be able once they start to reflect. And I think maybe being a social worker in the past really helped me, because I got a lot of comments while I was in training. Oh, Anne, you're too much of a social worker in this conversation. You're too empathetic or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but it really helped me to help people open up. So, yeah, collaboration, that's what it's all about, I guess. After the education I got from the Institute of Nonverbal Strategy Analysis, INSA, you might understand that I did not only do security clearances, but also started to train the operational departments as well. So the people who really had to go out there to elicit information from sources, from possible targets. I started to train situational awareness. I started to train the Corps Commando troops, the Royal Dutch Marechaussee, and all their apartments as well from within the AVD, because we had a lot of collaboration going on there. And that really helped me to understand, but also to build my own method based on practices and scientific research, because I had to teach and I had to argument, I had to understand myself. So this is actually the career the development I made in my career, to be able to close the gap between science and practices. So that really helped me, but in, I guess, 2019, I was only teaching again, like with the parole probation service in the past, and I was like, okay, I should develop myself again. So then I became a managing partner of that Institute of Nonverbal Strategy Analysis, because we were not then on that point that we actually came to the publication of the research. So I helped Herman back then to get that publication going, to get the marketing going, to give more noise to the whole INSA method. But then I started to miss my own screenings, my own work, helping clients, helping businesses. So in 2022, I decided to start my own company actually. And that's what I also built within my own method as well, is that situational awareness is also about self-awareness. And when we come back, we take a whole route back. What I found with intelligence officers quite often, that if they got into a stressful situation, they started to show body language as well. And I got into the situation where this officer actually was caught in a group of people with a car while she had to go and meet her source. And she showed a lot of anger. And that was actually the reason that all those people were actually going on top of her. It was a scenario training. It was a very real scenario training. And they started to hit her in a way, in a sense. But what was very interesting, that the men were starting to be aggressive, intimidating, but the women were trying to help her in the group. And this got me thinking as well. And I said, maybe the men are responding and reacting to your expression of anger. And then she told me, I was not angry. I was not angry at all. I felt helpless. I felt overwhelmed. So I found that although we can see and think a lot about micro expressions, it's all about the perception. It's all about your own awareness. Are you congruent with what you tend to show yourself, and can other people see that? So it's actually about the fundamental basics of what do people do in the interaction. So this is what I started to understand really when I observed my own trainings in that regard.
Yeah. The last thing I want to mention, because it's one of the first ways I actually saw some of what you're doing. And I know you're doing a lot of training courses, which I think is great. I know you're active on LinkedIn, and we've got a lot of the kind of the same connections of people in this space of trying to increase training and research around not just investigative interviewing, but on how we can kind of be better at assessment of credibility and those types of things. But the first thing I had seen that you did that brought me to you was your TEDx talk, and I know we talked a little bit about that can be a bit of a nerve-wracking process, and you had to kind of prepare your speech and almost memorize what you were going to say. But within that, in that TED Talk, when I was watching, I know you had a little activity you did with the audience where they had to record themselves.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you could just kind of explain that scenario, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, and I do it quite often in trainings actually. So what we want to know in investigative interviewing or scenario training is your own perception, and you can only know it by looking yourself in the mirror. But hey, we have selfies these days.
Right.
So what I tend to do is ask people to put the video in the selfie mode, and then I start to ask questions. And it can be questions like, how was your day today? How did you arrive to the venue? When was the last time that you got nervous? And when I go into training or coaching, I would also like to say, how did you call your mother when you were younger? And ask them to repeat that. And how did you call your father when you were younger? Because then you tend to go into people's education, people's drivers, people's toxic relationship as well. And it really helps you to understand where your own behavior comes from and how you deal with stress from the inside and the outside. And then we start to talk with people and ask questions about, okay, what do you see? What could other people's perception be based upon what you see of yourself as well? So this is a very good little training exercise that can help you to give more self-reflection.
I thought it was great, and I learned from that when you did it on the TED Talk. I know a lot of people listening are, as I mentioned before, are interviewers, but also might be people that have to do public speaking and don't enjoy that. And so I know something that we do with all of our trainers is record yourself teaching something, record yourself presenting something, and it's amazing how much you learn, like you just demonstrated, when you're watching yourself on video and realize you're making no eye contact, or you look down the whole time, or you're fidgety with your hands, and you wouldn't know that unless you intentionally forced yourself to record and then watch it. It's really great training. That's good. So I know I mentioned this earlier. We'll put some of this in the show notes, but to kind of wrap up, two things is, I know you're offering a lot of training and services now, so you can maybe explain a little bit about that. And then also, if you just have, one last kind of takeaway for our guests. So we got a lot of information today, but if there's one last thing you want them to kind of think about before we wrap up, I'll give you some space to do that.
Okay. I created this method based on my own experiences, right? So I have this 3-pillar method, and one of the pillars is nonverbal assessment. The other pillar is conversational skills, investigative interviewing, but you can only get and elicit information if you can combine these two. But also if you understand behaviors, psychopathology or psychiatry, or what the body and the language does with people who uses substances, for instance. So this is what I call non-verbal intelligence, that you are able to combine those two, but also understand certain context within what is going on with people. So this is what I train people in. I give those trainings, I consult businesses, I do HR assessments for people in high-stake interviews when they are going to be in a high-stake role at a company, for instance. I coach CEOs to be able to understand themselves and their own impacts, and the root cause analysis, so business cultural analysis, to understand the root cause of problems of a certain culture, integrity situations, cases that might come up, etc. And this will also be in my book, actually. So what I have learned in the last 25 years, and how I came up with my theories and the literature and combining everything together. So this is what I do. And I think the biggest lesson in my book will also be, if you want to read and understand others, you must first try to read and understand yourself. I think that would be the best way to be a good interviewer, to help people, to understand people, and to show vulnerability, if you will. Because you as an interviewer ask people to be vulnerable. And I think that's the most important thing you can do. You have to show your own vulnerability as well, to say, oh, maybe I asked this question but it wasn't the right timing, or sorry that I did this, how can we help each other to get to the clue, or whatever that is going on, would be my best message I can give.
That's a great message, and that's really my biggest takeaway from our conversation is how sometimes I'm so focused on the other person's response and not recognizing what did I do to cause that response. Was my question too pointed? Were my eyes rolling? Was I smiling before I asked the question? Did that impact somebody else? I think that's really good takeaway, and probably difficult feedback for people because you got to be critical of yourself. So.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for your time. I know we only scratched the surface of the experience that you have, so I'd love to have you back on again, and we can kind of dive into some of these other topics. I know, the use of AI and other kind of machine learning is coming out and trying to assess credibility and screening, and I know we both have some opinions on that, so we could probably get into that on another episode.
Sure.
But I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for the interview. I really liked it a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great, and thank you all for listening to this episode of Truth Be Told. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And to keep this conversation going, follow the Truth Be Told podcast on LinkedIn and Truth Be Told CFI on Twitter. On behalf of the International Association of Interviewers, Rick Landers-Zalowski, and our valued sponsors, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast.